And so I was reading through this first reading about Paul and Silas in prison. I'm reminded of when I went to Philippi, and I was there by the river where he baptized Lydia, and then we got to see the excavated remains of this very small prison cell, and they were saying, this is the prison cell of Philippi, so this is probably where St. Paul was. And I was like, oh my, that's tiny. But as I was rereading about how they were singing hymns even after they were beaten. Remember, they were beaten with rods before they were put into prison. And then they're there and they're singing hymns to God. This great joy. And I was reminded of a man named Dr. Wurmbrand. I'm not sure if you ever heard of him. Dr. Richard Wurmbrand. Bishop Sheen used to talk about him. And I did a little bit of research on him a little bit later. But Dr. Richard Wurmbrand was a Romanian Lutheran pastor when the communists came into Romania. And the communists had this Congress of Cults where they called all the different heads of religion to come and gather. And so as they were pretty much saying, atheism is the new religion of the state. It's communism. One bishop gets up and said, on my way here, I took down the cross from my steeple. And another Christian leader said, there have been 3 great revelations of God to man: Moses, Christ, and Stalin. And Richard Wurmbrand's wife, Sabina, looks at him and said, go, wipe the spit off the face of Christ. He looks at her and says, if I do, you lose a husband. She says, I don't want a coward for a husband. So he gets up there and he starts proclaiming Christ. And even some of those who had renounced Christ were rejoicing with him because that someone had the courage finally. But the communists took the microphone away from him, and then he spent many years in a communist prison. And thinking about the tortures he underwent because he was a pastor, but also because he continued to preach Christ even in the prison. They'd put him in a cell with starving rats for a week. And yet God, like Daniel in the lion's den, was able to protect him and to lead him out. Or they put him into this small closet with nails protruding, and as he would lose his balance and get tired and weary, he'd fall and lose part of his flesh on the nails. And they'd beat him in all these different ways, but every time they let him out back into the prison population, he would say something along the lines of, like I was saying before I was interrupted, and continuing to talk about Christ. And this spirit of St. Paul and Silas proclaiming Christ even from the heart of the prison, so much so that when the jailer would have killed himself because of the earthquake and thinking that they had escaped, and they said, no, let us speak to you about Christ. Through the intercession of St. Paul and St. Silas, may we have that courage, especially when we are under persecution, to continue to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ risen from the dead.